The last happy memory I have of the three of us, my mother, my younger sister Clara, and me, was under the sagging branches of Grandma Willow's enormous oak tree. The air that August afternoon was thick with the scent of cut grass and blooming hydrangeas, a perfume I would forever associate with a peace I didn't know was already fractured. Clara, all sunshine and effortless grace, was weaving daisy chains while Mom, perched on a plaid blanket, watched her with that soft, unguarded smile she reserved only for her favored daughter. I was a few feet away, sketching the gnarled trunk of the old oak, trying to capture its strength on paper, feeling both a part of the scene and utterly separate from it. That was 6 years ago, before my divorce, before my business went under, before the quiet desperation of my mid-30s began to feel less like a phase and more like a permanent address. Now, the only thing connecting me to that memory was the faint, lingering scent of lavender from the sachet tucked in my purse, a gift from Grandma Willow years ago. I was standing in the hallway of my mother's house, a place that felt more like a museum of my childhood than a home. The floorboards beneath my sensible flats creaked a familiar, mournful tune as I shifted my weight, waiting for the family meeting to begin. It was supposed to be about settling Grandma's estate, a final, somber task after her passing 2 months prior. But the muffled voices drifting from the closed living room door told me it was about something else entirely. I'd arrived 10 minutes early, a habit ingrained from a lifetime of trying to prove my reliability. Mom had asked me to grab the lemon loaf from the kitchen counter, and as I returned, their voices, low and conspiratorial, snagged on the quiet air. I froze, my hand hovering over the cool brass doorknob. "It's for the best, Clara. You know Amelia. She's so adrift. A large sum of money would just be a liability for her," Mom was saying. Her voice, usually so melodic, had a sharp, clinical edge. "I know, Mom, but the will..." Clara's voice was softer, laced with a performance of reluctance I knew all too well. It was the same tone she used as a child when she'd accidentally break one of my toys and then look at me with wide, apologetic eyes. Grandma was so specific. "Your grandmother was sentimental," Mom countered, her voice dropping lower, forcing me to lean in, my ear almost touching the painted wood. "She didn't see what I see. Amelia's divorce left her fragile. She can't handle responsibility. We'll give her a small allowance, of course, enough to keep her comfortable. We'll tell her it's an annuity Grandma set up. It's a kindness, really." A kindness. The word landed like a physical blow, sucking the air from my lungs. My knuckles went white as I gripped the lemon loaf, the plastic wrap crinkling under the pressure. I could smell the sweet, citrusy bread, a scent that should have been comforting, but now felt sickeningly cloying. They weren't just discussing my inheritance. They were rewriting my identity. Adrift. Fragile. Irresponsible. They were building a cage of pity around me, and the bars were forged from their twisted version of love. The floorboards groaned again as I took a half step back, my heart hammering against my ribs a frantic, terrified rhythm. This wasn't a meeting. It was an ambush, and I had just stumbled into the tall grass, listening to the hunters plan my capture. Growing up, I was the steady, quiet one. Amelia, the observer. Clara was the spectacle. She was born with the spark that drew everyone in, a magnetic force of charm and vivacity. While I was content with my books and sketch pads, Clara was mastering pirouettes in the living room, her laughter echoing off the walls. Our family photos tell the story perfectly. Clara is always in the center, a blur of motion and bright colors, her smile dazzling. Our mother, Eleanor, was the sun that Clara orbited. She basked in Clara's reflected light, celebrating every minor triumph as a monumental achievement. A finger painting was hailed as a masterpiece. A role in the school play was treated like a Broadway debut. My achievements, quieter and more academic, were met with a polite, distracted nod. A perfect report card earned a clipped, "That's nice, dear," before her attention would inevitably drift back to whatever drama Clara was currently starring in. It wasn't malicious. Not then. It was just the way things were. I was the reliable wallpaper. Clara was the dazzling chandelier. The only person who seemed to see the full picture was Grandma Willow. Her real name was Wilhelmina, but we called her Willow because of the weeping willow in her backyard where she taught me how to read. Her house was my sanctuary. It smelled of old books, Earl Grey tea, and the faint, spicy scent of the potpourri she kept in porcelain bowls. Unlike my mother, who saw my quiet nature as a lack, Grandma Willow saw it as a strength. "Still waters run deep, Amelia," she'd tell me, her fingers gnarled with arthritis but surprisingly gentle, tucking a stray strand of hair behind my ear. "Don't you ever let anyone convince you that your quiet is empty." She was the one who bought me my first set of professional-grade charcoal pencils. She was the one who framed my sketch of her oak tree and hung it in her entryway, right next to a professionally commissioned family portrait. "This one has more soul," she'd declared, tapping the glass over my drawing. My relationship with Clara was a delicate dance of sisterly affection and simmering rivalry. I loved her, of course. I loved her fierce energy and her ability to make anyone laugh. But there was always a current of competition flowing beneath the surface. One I felt she was largely oblivious to. She'd borrow my favorite sweater without asking and return it with a stain, offering a breezy apology that made me feel petty for being upset. She'd monopolize conversations, effortlessly steering them toward her latest adventures, while my own stories withered on my tongue, unspoken. I became an expert at receding, at making myself smaller to give her more space to shine. It was a role I had perfected over decades. After college, Clara's star continued to rise. She landed a coveted job in marketing, married a handsome, successful lawyer, and had 2 perfect children who looked like they'd stepped out of a catalog. Her life was a meticulously curated Instagram feed of sun-drenched vacations and tastefully decorated holiday gatherings. My path was quieter, more complicated. I channeled my artistic talents into a small graphic design business. For a few years, it thrived. I married my college sweetheart, Mark, a man I thought understood my quiet depths. We bought a small house, and I finally felt like I was building something that was truly mine. But the foundation was faulty. Mark's quiet support slowly curdled into resentment of the long hours I poured into my work. The 2018 recession hit my small business hard, and as the financial pressure mounted, the cracks in our marriage widened into impassable chasms. The divorce was amicable on paper, but emotionally devastating. I sold the house to pay off the business debts and moved into a small, sterile apartment that smelled of fresh paint and loneliness. I was, as my mother so clinically observed, adrift. I felt like a ship whose anchor had been cut loose, tossed about by waves of failure and regret. During that time, Mom and Clara's support was a strange mix of pity and impatience. They'd call, their voices oozing a syrupy concern that felt more like judgment. Mom would ask, as if I were a child, "Maybe you should try that new yoga studio," Clara would suggest, her solution for my existential crisis, $100 a month subscription. They saw my struggle not as a temporary storm, but as a permanent character flaw. My failure seemed to confirm a narrative they'd long held about me, that I was simply not as capable, not as resilient as Clara. The one steady light during that dark period was Grandma Willow. She never offered platitudes or easy fixes. Instead, she'd listen. She'd sit with me for hours in her cozy, sunlit kitchen, pouring endless cups of tea while I unburdened my heart. She was the only one who didn't look at me with pity. She looked at me with faith. "This is just a chapter, Amelia Bug," she said one afternoon, her hand covering mine on the worn wooden table. "Not the whole book." She spoke of the future, of the inheritance she would one day leave for me and Clara. "It's not a fortune," she'd said with a wry smile, "but it's a foundation. A little security so my girls can build whatever they dream of. For you, maybe it's a new start for your business." That promise became my secret hope. It wasn't about the money itself. It was about the validation. It was the foundation she spoke of, a chance to rebuild, to prove not to them, but to myself, that I wasn't the fragile failure they saw. It was a tangible piece of her faith in me. And now, standing in the hallway, gripping a lemon loaf like a weapon, I understood that they were trying to steal that too. Not just the money, but the meaning behind it. They wanted to take her final act of faith and twist it into an act of charity, a handout for the poor, lost sister. The betrayal wasn't just about finances. It was about the complete and utter erasure of the person my grandmother believed me to be. It was the ultimate confirmation of my place in the family, a problem to be managed, a story to be rewritten for their own comfort. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, I forced my hand to release its death grip on the lemon loaf. The plastic wrap was a mess of crinkles, a reflection of my own crumpled composure. I couldn't confront them. Not like this. A raw, emotional outburst was exactly what they expected from the fragile Amelia they had constructed. It would only validate their narrative, prove their point. I needed to be calm, strategic. I needed to be the person my grandmother knew I was. Quiet, yes, but not weak. Observant and fiercely intelligent. I smoothed my shirt, forced a neutral expression onto my face, and turned the doorknob. The scene in the living room was a perfect tableau of their conspiracy. Mom was perched on the edge of an armchair, her teacup held delicately in her manicured fingers. Clara was curled on the sofa, scrolling through her phone, a picture of casual indifference. They both looked up as I entered, their faces instantly rearranging into masks of warm welcome. "Amelia, there you are," Mom chirped, her smile a little too bright. "Sorry, I was just admiring your new hydrangeas," I lied smoothly, placing the loaf on the coffee table. The scent of lemon now felt like an accusation. Clara said, not looking up from her phone. I sat in the armchair opposite them, the silence stretching uncomfortably. I could feel their eyes on me, assessing me. Were they looking for cracks? For signs of the fragility they were so certain defined me? I focused on a small detail, a loose thread on the arm of the chair, and anchored myself to it. I would not give them what they wanted. The lawyer, a man named Mr. Davies with a kind face and tired eyes, arrived a few minutes later. He spread the documents across the coffee table, and the charade began. He read through the legal jargon, his voice a low drone. My mother nodded at all the right moments, a picture of solemn responsibility. Clara finally put her phone away, adopting an expression of profound sadness that looked utterly rehearsed. I watched them, a silent observer at my own execution. Every sympathetic glance Mom threw my way felt like a twist of the knife. I had to fight the urge to recoil. They were so good at this. They had been practicing these roles their entire lives. When Mr. Davies finally reached the distribution of assets, he cleared his throat. My eyes flicked to my mother. I saw the barest flicker of something in her expression. Annoyance, before it was smoothed over with practiced grief. "Of course," Mom said, her voice thick with false emotion. She reached for the document. "Clara and I have been discussing the best way to manage this for everyone's benefit. We've been thinking, Amelia, with everything you've been through." Here it comes, I thought, my heart beginning to pound a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. "We think it might be wise to set up a trust for your portion," she continued, her tone dripping with condescending care. "A managed fund. It would provide you with a steady, reliable income each month. No stress, no complicated decisions." Clara chimed in, her voice earnest. "We're just worried about you, Ames. We don't want you to have to deal with the pressure of managing a large sum. This way, you're taken care of." The room was silent. They were looking at me, their faces a perfect blend of concern and love. It was a masterful performance. They had framed the theft as a gift. They had wrapped their betrayal in the language of protection. The air was thick with their lies, and I felt like I was suffocating. I looked from my mother's pleading eyes to my sister's concerned frown, and for the first time, I didn't see family. I saw strategists. I saw two people who had looked at my pain, my struggle, and my grief, and saw only an opportunity. I needed to breathe. I need to think about it," I managed to say, my voice sounding distant, as if it belonged to someone else. Mom's smile was triumphant. "Of course, dear." She believed she had won. She thought my hesitation was a sign of my weakness, my inability to make decisions. She had no idea that in that moment, a quiet, cold resolve was beginning to crystallize in my heart. They thought they knew my story. It was time for me to learn the truth of it. And then I would make them listen. The weeks that followed were a blur of quiet, methodical work. I declined their daily calls, responding with brief, polite texts. Still thinking. Every message was a small act of defiance, a reclaiming of my own time and thoughts. They interpreted my silence as meek acceptance, a sign that their plan was working. They were already spending my inheritance, not just the money, but the story that went with it. My tiny apartment, which had once felt like a prison of my failures, transformed into a war room. My mission was not to fight them, but to find the truth. My weapon was my grandmother's legacy, not the money, but her words, her memories, her life. Grandma Willow had been a meticulous record keeper. She wasn't a hoarder, but a curator of her own history. Her attic, which Mom had dismissively told me was just full of old junk, became my treasure trove. It was another casual act of condescension, as if the only things I'd be interested in were dusty knickknacks. I let myself in on a gray Tuesday afternoon, the house silent and still. I bypassed the main floors with their polished furniture and staged family photos and went straight for the pull-down ladder to the attic. The air upstairs was thick with the smell of aging paper, cedar, and time itself. Dust motes danced in the single beam of light from the circular window at the far end. It was filled with steamer trunks, labeled boxes, and old suitcases. This was Grandma's world. Inside, bundled in faded silk ribbons, were hundreds of letters. Letters she'd written to her husband while he was away at war. Letters from her sisters. And, most importantly, letters she had written to my mother over the years, and copies of letters she'd sent to me and Clara at summer camp, at college, during our adult lives. I sat there for hours on the dusty floorboards, the only sounds the rustle of brittle paper and the frantic beating of my own heart. I started a timeline cross-referencing the letters with dates. A pattern began to emerge. Her letters to me were filled with encouragement about my art, questions about my business, and shared articles about female entrepreneurs. She saw me as a peer, a creator. "Your vision is so clear, Amelia," she wrote in one. Her letters to my mother about me were different. They were defensive. It became clear that Mom had been painting a picture of me as fragile and flighty for years. I found a letter from Grandma, dated shortly after my college graduation. It is her passion and her profession. To diminish it is to diminish her. She is not Clara. She does not need to be. Her strength is of a different kind, a quieter, more resilient sort. My breath hitched. This wasn't a new narrative. Mom had been crafting this story for my entire adult life, and my grandmother had been trying to fight it. She had been my silent champion, defending me in conversations I never knew were happening. Here, the evidence became even more visceral. There were photo albums filled not just with the posed, perfect shots that decorated Mom's house, but with candid snapshots. Me, age 7, completely absorbed in a book on the porch swing, my face a mask of concentration. There was a photo of me at my high school art show, standing proudly next to my charcoal series. I'm not smiling broadly, but there's a quiet confidence in my posture. On the back, Grandma's familiar cursive. Amelia finds her voice. Then I found her journals. They weren't daily diaries, but collections of thoughts, fears, and observations. My hands trembled as I opened one from 10 years ago. Her entries about me and Clara were stark. She wrote of Clara's dazzling but sometimes blinding light, and her fear that Clara's self-absorption, encouraged by my mother, would one day hurt her. But her pages about me were filled with a deep, abiding worry, not for my capabilities, but for how the family's narrative would affect me. One entry, written the year my business was at its peak, stopped me cold. "Eleanor called today," she wrote. She mentioned Amelia's success, but her tone was strange, almost disappointed, as if Amelia's competence disrupts her worldview. She needs one daughter to be the star and one to be the project. I fear she is casting Amelia in a role she was never meant to play. Amelia is the oak, not the vine. The words echoed the sketch I had made all those years ago. Grandma saw me. She truly, deeply saw me. Tears I hadn't allowed myself to cry began to fall, silent and hot, onto the delicate, yellowed page. They were tears of grief, yes, but also of profound, earth-shattering validation. I wasn't crazy. The feeling of being overlooked, of being subtly diminished my entire life, wasn't a product of my own insecurity. It was a carefully constructed reality, a family myth perpetuated by my mother and enabled by my sister. Inside were a dozen microcassettes. Grandma had used a small recorder to make audio notes to herself in her later years when her arthritis made writing difficult. I bought a cheap player online and spent a whole night listening, a pair of headphones clamped over my ears. Most of it was mundane, reminders to call the plumber, grocery lists, thoughts on her garden. And then I heard it. Her voice, a little frail but clear as a bell, recorded about a year before she passed. "Note to self," she began, her voice raspy. "Spoke with Eleanor about the will again. She is insistent about setting up a trust for Amelia. I told her no, absolutely not. Amelia is the most financially prudent person I know. She built a business from nothing. That it fails due to a recession is not a reflection on her character, but on the cruelty of the world. Eleanor cannot see this. She sees only Clara's linear success and Amelia's messy, more interesting path. The inheritance must be direct. It is a tool for Amelia, not a leash. It is a symbol of my faith in her. I will call Mr. Davies tomorrow and make my intentions explicitly, unequivocally clear once more. It is vital that Amelia has the freedom to write her own next chapter." I clicked the stop button, and the silence of my apartment rushed in. My hands were shaking. My mother hadn't just come up with this plan after Grandma died. She had been actively trying to persuade my grandmother to change her will, to strip me of my autonomy while she was still alive. And Grandma had refused. She had fought for me. The plan in my head began to shift. This was no longer just about reclaiming my inheritance. It was about honoring my grandmother's final wish. It was about making her truth, the real truth of who she was and what she believed, unignorable. My quiet quest for evidence had transformed into a sacred duty. I wasn't just fighting for my future. I was fighting for her legacy. And I would not use anger or accusation as my weapons. I would use her own words. I would use the truth. The final meeting was set for a Saturday morning at Mom's house. The air was thick with a cloying civility. Clara had brought pastries from a trendy bakery, and Mom was fussing with a new floral arrangement on the mantelpiece. They were acting as if this was a mere formality, the final dotting of I's and crossing of T's on a deal that was already done. My quietness over the past weeks had been their confirmation. I arrived with a single, elegant leather portfolio under my arm. It felt heavy, not with the weight of paper, but with the weight of years of unspoken truths. "Amelia, you're so punctual," Mom said, kissing the air beside my cheek. "I did," I said, my voice even and calm. We gathered again in the living room. Mr. Davies was there, looking slightly uncomfortable, as if he sensed the tension beneath the surface. My mother launched into her speech immediately, likely one she had rehearsed. "We're so glad you've had time to consider," she began, folding her hands in her lap. Clara and I, with Mr. Davies' help, have already drawn up the paperwork for the trust. It's a wonderful plan, really. It will generate a very comfortable monthly income for you, Amelia. It's the perfect solution, Clara added, smiling at me with what she probably thought was reassuring warmth. I let the silence hang in the air for a moment after she finished. I looked from my mother's expectant face to my sister's. They were waiting for me to acquiesce, to nod, to be the grateful, fragile creature they had created. I placed the portfolio on the coffee table and opened it. My hands were perfectly steady. I appreciate the thought you've put into this, I began, my voice clear and measured. I didn't look at them. I looked at Mr. Davies. But I won't be needing a trust. The shift in the room was palpable. It was as if the temperature had dropped 10 degrees. Mom's smile tightened. Amelia, dear, I don't think you're understanding the complexities. Oh, I think I understand them perfectly, I said, still not raising my voice. I pulled out the first item, a high-quality, enlarged photograph of the charcoal sketch of the oak tree that had hung in Grandma's entryway. I placed it in the center of the table. I asked, my gaze sweeping over both of them. I drew this when I was 16. Clara frowned, confused. It has everything to do with how Grandma saw me, I said. I then laid out a series of photographs from the attic albums, me at the art show, me reading on the porch, me covered in mud after planting her garden with her. With each one, I provided a brief, factual caption. This was the day she told me my quiet was full of stories. Mom's face was beginning to pale. She knew where these had come from. The attic she'd dismissed as junk. Next, I took out copies of the letters. I didn't read the most damning parts. Not yet. I started gently. I placed a copy of a letter Grandma had sent me in college in front of Clara. This is a letter where she encourages my business idea years before I ever launched it. Then, I placed a different letter in front of my mother. It was the one where Grandma defended my career choice to her. I had highlighted a single sentence. Her strength is of a different kind, a quieter, more resilient sort. Mom stared at the highlighted words, her own mother's handwriting a stark, undeniable indictment. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Grandma saw my strength, I said, my voice still quiet, but now imbued with a strength they had never heard before. She saw my resilience, the narrative that I am adrift or fragile or in need of protection from myself is not one she ever subscribed to. It seems to be a story that the two of you have created. Clara flushed, a splotchy, angry red. That's not fair, Amelia, I asked, finally looking directly at her. My gaze was not angry. It was genuinely curious, and that seemed to unnerve her more than any shout would have. I saved the final piece for last. I took out a small, sleek digital audio player. Mr. Davies, I said, turning to the lawyer, whose face was a mask of professional neutrality, though his eyes were wide with interest. As you know, the primary duty of an executor is to carry out the deceased's wishes to the letter. I pressed play. Grandma Willow's voice filled the silent room. It was weak, but her conviction was iron. We all sat, frozen, as she spoke from beyond the grave, insistent about setting up a trust for Amelia. I told her no, absolutely not. It is a tool for Amelia, not a leash. It is a symbol of my faith in her. It is vital that Amelia has the freedom to write her own next chapter. When the recording ended, the silence that followed was heavier than anything I had ever experienced. It was thick with shame, deceit, and the undeniable, ringing clarity of the truth. My mother was staring at the floral arrangement, her face ashen. One hand was pressed to her mouth, and her shoulders were shaking. Clara was looking down at her own hands, her polished nails looking garish and absurd in the somber light. For the first time in her life, she had no witty comeback, no charming deflection. She had been rendered speechless. I didn't say another word. I didn't need to. I hadn't yelled. I hadn't cried. I hadn't accused. I had simply presented the evidence. I had let my grandmother speak for herself. I had allowed the weight of the truth, in her own words and through her own memories, to settle over the room and do its work. They had tried to erase her legacy of faith in me, and I had simply held it up to the light for them to see. Mr. Davies cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud. He looked at my mother and sister, his expression no longer neutral. It was one of deep disappointment. "Well," he said, his voice firm, "I believe Wilhelmina's intentions are, as she herself said, unequivocally clear." He began packing his briefcase, the clicks of the latches like final nails in the coffin of their scheme. My mother finally looked at me. Her eyes were filled with a chaotic storm of emotions I couldn't begin to decipher. Shame, anger, regret, and something that looked terrifyingly like defeat. But I saw no remorse, not for what she had done, but for being caught. Clara stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "I need some air," she mumbled, and fled the room without a backward glance. My work was done. I stood and calmly gathered my evidence: the photos, the letters, the audio player. I placed them back in the portfolio. I hadn't done this for them. I hadn't done it for an apology or a tearful reunion. I had done it for me and for Grandma Willow. I had reclaimed my story. As I walked toward the door, my mother's voice, small and broken, stopped me. I paused, but didn't turn around. She whispered. I finally turned to face her. I looked at the woman who had cast me as the lesser daughter my entire life, who had tried to steal my future and rewrite my grandmother's past. And I felt a surprising, hollow sort of pity for her. Because you and Clara made my life, my struggles, and my character a topic for a business meeting, I said, my voice devoid of malice, full only of a sad, final clarity. You tried to turn Grandma's love into a transaction. I didn't do this to you. I did it to honor her. I presented the truth. What you do with it now is your story. I walked out of the house and didn't look back. The sun was bright and the air felt clean and new. I felt a lightness in my chest, a space that had been filled with years of quiet resentment and self-doubt, now blissfully, beautifully empty. In the end, there was no dramatic confrontation, no tearful reconciliation. The family sisterhood, which I now understood had always been a carefully constructed lie, simply dissolved. It was an apology for the execution, not the intent. I never replied. My mother and I exchanged a few necessary sterile emails regarding the estate logistics, her tone professionally distant. The warmth, however manufactured, was gone forever. There was nothing left to say. The inheritance, when it came, felt different than I had imagined. It wasn't a lottery win or a magical solution to all my problems. It was exactly what my grandmother had intended it to be: a foundation, a clean slate. It was quiet, solid, and real. It was the tool she had entrusted to me, a symbol of her unwavering faith. I didn't rush to rebuild my old life. Instead, I used the security to do something I hadn't done in years. I gave myself space. I rented a small cottage by the sea for 6 months, a place that smelled of salt and damp wood. I spent my days walking on the beach, sketching the changing tides, and reading my grandmother's journals, not for evidence, but for her wisdom and her company. I got to know her not just as my champion, but as a woman with her own hopes, fears, and a fierce, quiet strength I now recognized in myself. Slowly, carefully, I began to build again. I didn't relaunch my graphic design business. That chapter was closed. Instead, I opened a small gallery in a nearby coastal town. It was a space dedicated to showcasing emerging local artists, the quiet ones, the observers whose work might otherwise be overlooked. It was a modest success, but it was wholly mine. I was no longer creating for clients. I was curating a space for stories to be told. One afternoon, a young woman came into the gallery. She was shy, clutching a portfolio to her chest, her eyes scanning the art with a hungry, nervous energy. I recognized the look immediately. I walked over, not with the slick pitch of a gallery owner, but with a simple, quiet question. "Tell me about your work," I said. As she began to speak, her passion and vision filling the quiet space, I saw a reflection of a younger me. And in that moment, I understood the true inheritance my grandmother had left me. It wasn't the money in the bank. It was the clarity of her vision. She had given me the ultimate gift. She had shown me how to see myself. I never erased my mother or Clara from my life entirely, but they exist now on the distant periphery. They are characters in a story that is no longer mine. I freed myself not by fighting them on their own terms, but by refusing to participate in their narrative. I didn't need to tear them down to build myself up. I just had to step away from the crumbling facade of our family and find my own solid ground. My life is not a spectacle. It is not a dazzling success story that would light up an Instagram feed. It is quiet, it is intentional, and it is authentic. It is filled with the scent of sea air, the texture of canvas, and the low hum of meaningful work. I am the oak, not the vine. I stand on my own, my roots run deep, and I am finally growing in the light. Grandma Willow was right. My best work was still ahead of me. I had just needed the freedom to hold the pen